So Donald Trump keeps pissing off Israel. Israel tells Donald Trump, listen, we don't want you doing any sort of deal with Iran. What does Donald Trump do? He says, I want to make a deal with Iran. Israel tells Donald Trump, let's do a coordinated attack on Iran. Donald Trump tells Israel, listen, you're not going to be dragging the United States into a war. Mr. Michael Waltz goes behind Donald Trump's back, and he starts talking to Netanyahu, and he starts talking with the Israelis about doing a coordinated attack on Iran. Donald Trump finds out, gets pissed off at Michael Waltz, fires Michael Waltz, and Israel tells Donald Trump, listen, do not lift the sanctions on Syria. What does Donald Trump do? He meets with the new leader of Syria, Mr. Ahmed al-Shara, and he makes the announcement that he will be lifting all of the sanctions on Syria, the exact opposite of what Israel demanded. So Donald Trump keeps pissing off the Israelis. Israel obviously doesn't like this. And so what is really happening? What is happening is the United States is handing over power to Turkey because Turkey is the one that told Donald Trump to lift the sanctions on Syria. Donald Trump said, I spoke with Mr. Erdogan, I had a conversation with him, and he told me to lift the sanctions on Syria, so we're going to lift the sanctions on Syria and enable Syria to be economically empowered. The exact opposite of what Israel wants. Israel wants to keep Syria weak because as long as Syria is weak, Israel doesn't have to worry about Syria. Donald Trump listened to Turkey. This is the whole point. Donald Trump listened to Turkey but did not listen to Israel. Israel told Trump, do not lift the sanctions on Syria. Donald Trump did the opposite. Why is this? I'll tell you why. It's very, very simple. Because Turkey, geopolitically speaking, Turkey is more important than Israel. Why is this? Because Turkey has this thing called the Dardanelles. Turkey controls the access way from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So if you look at a map, here's Turkey, here's the Black Sea, here's the Bosphorus Strait. From the Bosphorus Strait, you enter the Sea of Marmara. From the Sea of Marmara, you go through the Dardanelles into the Aegean Sea, and from the Aegean Sea into the Mediterranean Sea. Ergo, Turkey is more important geopolitically than Israel is. Because what other country is on the Black Sea? Oh, that's right, America's biggest nemesis, Russia. Russia is a Black Sea country. Russia and Turkey are both Black Sea neighbors. And the access way from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean is controlled by NATO's second most armed country, Turkey. So therefore, the United States wants to continue to use Turkey to limit Russia's access into the Mediterranean. Because America is terrified of Turkey and Russia having an alliance, because in such a situation, Russia would have limitless access into the Mediterranean and Russia would become even more powerful. So the United States does not want to allow that to happen. So therefore, the United States wants to continue to use Turkey as a chess piece against the Russians. So therefore, Turkey is more important than Israel is. So Israel tells the United States, do not lift the sanctions on Syria. And what does the United States do? The exact opposite of what Israel demanded. Not only this, but Israel told Donald Trump, listen, do not allow Turkey to resume purchasing F-35 fighter jets. What does Donald Trump do? He has a conversation with Erdogan and he says, hey, Erdogan, how about we start selling Turkey F-35 fighter jets again? He's doing the opposite of what Israel demands because Turkey is more important. And the United States is tired of being the police officer of the world. And so the United States is saying, listen, we're tired of dealing with Syria. Turkey, you handle it. And what happened? You see, America has soldiers in Syria. And these soldiers were put in Syria in order to work with the Kurds to fight against ISIS. Well, what happened just recently? The PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, which has been an enemy of Turkey for decades, just announced that they will be disarming and disbanding. And in the midst of this, the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is really a Kurdish paramilitary organization that is connected to the PKK, therefore it is an enemy of Turkey. The SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, announced that they will be integrating themselves into the Syrian military. So what does this do? What it does is it enables the Turks to tell the Americans, listen, America, you don't have to have soldiers in Syria anymore. We will work with the Kurds. We're not going to be enemies. We will work with the Kurds to fight against ISIS. We will govern Syria. We will handle Syria. And so the Americans now have the opportunity to say, okay, Turkey can handle it. And what did Donald Trump say during his first term as president? He said, let someone else deal with Syria. Who was that someone else that he had in mind? It was Turkey. And so what did Donald Trump say recently? He told Erdogan, congratulations, you have done what no one else could do. You have taken over Syria. This is what Donald Trump told Erdogan. And Donald Trump tells Erdogan, Donald Trump also declared that the key to Syria is Turkey. In other words, we want Turkey to control Syria. We want to allow Turkey to control Syria. Turkey says, thank you very much, America. We got this. Why is Turkey so enthusiastic about controlling Syria? Because Turkey wants to revive its Ottoman Empire, and Syria used to be a territory of the Ottoman Empire. Do you know what other territory used to be under the Ottoman Empire? Israel. Israel, what we today call Israel, what we used to call Palestine, used to be under the control of the Ottoman Empire. So if Turkey is going to be reviving its Ottoman Empire, guess what? Israel is going to be on the crosshairs of Turkey. And now that Turkey is controlling Syria for the most part, Turkey is smack right next to Israel because Israel borders with Syria. That is why Israel has its military in southern Syria. This is why Israel is working with the Druze. Israel is talking about how they care so much about the Druze, etc., etc. And I'm sure there are Israelis who do truly, sincerely care about the Druze, but this is a geopolitical strategy at the end of the day. Israel wants to use the Druze as a proxy in order to keep Syria divided, because as long as Syria is divided, Syria is weak, and Israel doesn't have to really worry about Syria so much. Also, if Syria is divided, that would make it more difficult for Turkey to control Syria. This is the whole strategy. Turkey, on the other hand, wants to keep Syria united because if Syria is united, it's more easy to control. For years, Turkey has been controlling the Idlib province in northern Syria, and while Turkey has been controlling the Idlib province, guess which currency they have been using in the Idlib province? The Turkish currency, the lira. So Turkey wants for the situation of the Idlib province to be the situation for the whole of Syria. Well, Turkey will... It would be much more difficult for Turkey to establish this goal, to fulfill this goal, if Syria is divided. And so this is why Israel wants to keep Syria divided. So there's this whole battle going on over Syria between Israel and Turkey. And, well, they both can't be ruling Syria. Turkey wants to revive its empire. Israel does not want this to happen. And Israel knows that if Turkey controls Syria, and if Turkey wants to go to war with Israel, guess what? Bam! Turkey is smack right next to Israel. So Israel, to be honest with you guys, Israel is pretty much screwed. And Israel screwed itself over because they should have just worked with Bashar al-Assad. They should have just cooperated with Bashar al-Assad. They should have just made friends with Bashar al-Assad, but no, they went against the Syrian eye doctor. They said, oh, he's a terrorist. Oh, he's one of the leaders of the evil axis in the Middle East, the Shiite axis of evil in the Middle East. He's allies with Iran, blah, blah, blah. Well, do you know what other country is an ally of Iran? Russia is. And Israel has been begging the Russians to stay in Syria so they can use the Russians to protect them from Turkey. This is how bad it is for Israel. But Israel really screwed itself over. Israel is like Judas. He thought, well, I'm just going to betray Christ, take my pieces of silver, and I'll have some wealth. But no, Judas ended up being killed by his own noose. Israel is like Haman. Haman thought, I'm going to kill all the Jews. I'm going to have Mordecai hanging from this noose. But no, you know what happened? Haman ended up being the one hanging from the damn noose. So this is the case of Israel. Israel thought, okay, we're going to go against Bashar. We'll overthrow him. And do you know who Israel backed to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? Israel backed the very terrorist organization that is running Syria right now. HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Yes, how do I know this? Because HTS used to be called Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra was doing horrendous atrocities during the Syrian civil war, killing Christians, raping women, all sorts of horrific things. And so Israel was backing those people, backing the worst of the worst. And so what has happened? Well, as we all know, Jabhat al-Nusra changed its name to HTS to make themselves sound, I don't know, give themselves a different name, new marketing strategy, I guess. And Jabhat al-Nusra / HTS overthrew Bashar al-Assad. And what happened? Benjamin Netanyahu then makes a statement saying that, oh yes, we have overthrown Bashar and Israel is going to take credit for it. Netanyahu boasted about how he contributed to the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. Now what is Israel doing? Netanyahu runs to America to meet with Donald Trump to ask for Trump's help with Turkey, to mediate between Israel and Turkey, because Israel is terrified of Turkey. And what does Donald Trump tell Netanyahu? He says, Natan, I can broker a deal with Turkey. I can settle things with Turkey for you, but you have to be reasonable. In other words, Natan, stop messing things up and stop being so damn reckless. This is why the United States is trying to push the Israelis to finally settle a ceasefire with Hamas, because the United States is worried about Iran, but at the same time, the United States wants to create this alliance between Israel and other Arab countries, Gulf Arab countries, to act as a counter against Iran. So certain things need to be done. Israel, let's stop butchering all these people in Gaza. Now, I do understand that there was a ceasefire before and it was broken, but still, the United States is continuing to try to pressure Israel to actually settle a ceasefire deal, because the United States wants to make things more normalized between Israel and the Gulf Arab states. At the same time, though, Turkey has an extremely important geostrategic, geopolitical location. It controls access from the Mediterranean, from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, thus being the only hindrance to allowing or to enabling Russia to have limitless access into the Mediterranean. So the United States needs Turkey. The United States cannot afford to lose Turkey. It just can't. NATO cannot afford to lose Turkey. So what is America doing? America is saying, okay, Israel, we know you want certain things. We're going to try to please you guys. The United States is not just going to throw Israel out the window, although that eventually is going to happen. But for now, it's not. The United States is saying, okay, Israel, we're going to try to please you to a certain extent because we don't want to lose you. But at the same time, we cannot lose Turkey. And Turkey is more important than you, Israel. So we're going to give Turkey what it wants as well. So if Turkey wants to buy F-35 fighter jets, we're going to sell them F-35 fighter jets. If Turkey wants us to lift the sanctions on Syria, we're going to lift the sanctions. And Turkey wants to control Syria. We want that. We invite that. We embrace that. So things are not looking good for Israel at all. And eventually there's going to be a clash between Israel and Turkey. This is very obvious. So, for example, after the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, there were all these Syrian Air Force bases that were left alone. And so what is Turkey doing? Turkey wants to control all of the Syrian air bases. Why? Because Turkey wants to park its Air Force in Syria. Turkey wants for Syria to be a territory of the Neo-Ottoman Empire. And so there is this air base called the T4 Air Base. And Turkey said, okay, we're going to control the T4 air base. And what does Israel do? Israel bombed the runway at the T4 air base to show the Turks, listen, you're not going to control the air base. We don't want you to control the air base. And so Turkey's foreign minister, Mr. Hakan Fidan, told Israel, back off. You better back off. So they both have antithetical aspirations. Turkey wants to revive its Neo-Ottoman Empire, and the Israelis want to keep the Middle East weak and divided so that Israel will be the most powerful country in the Middle East. So Israel wants to have its empire. Turkey wants to have its empire. They both can't have empires, and they both can't be controlling Syria at the same time. So eventually there is going to be a clash. And recently, the Israeli Consul General in New York, Mr. Ophir Akunis, declared to Mr. Erdogan this is not your territory, Mr. Erdogan. And he said, Syria is not your territory. Syria is something else. You cannot be in Syria. And we are watching very carefully, Mr. Erdogan. So Israel wants to control Syria. At the same time, Turkey wants to control Syria. At the same time, Israel wants to control the United States. Israel wants to control the United States. The problem is that the American population is becoming more and more either indifferent towards Israel or antagonistic towards Israel. And that is going to be reflected in American politics. And you are already seeing this to a certain extent. And let's not forget also the demography of the Republican Party is changing. More and more Middle Eastern people voted for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump sort of wants to placate that voting bloc. I'm not entirely sure how much that's going to happen, but things are changing. The political climate is changing, and people are becoming more and more anti-Israel. So as more and more Americans become either indifferent, fatigued, or antagonistic towards Israel, the United States is going to start to go through a shift policy-wise when it comes to Israel. The United States basically told Israel, listen, we want to do a deal with Iran. Israel said, we want you to do a bombing on Iran. America said, no. Israel said, listen, Mr. al-Shara is an enemy. And the United States is saying, we're going to meet with Mr. al-Shara, and we're going to lift the sanctions on Syria, because America wants to enable the revival of Turkish power so that the Americans can then use the Turks against Russia in the Middle East. Also, keep in mind that the United States wants to focus more on China. It wants to focus more on China and less on the Middle East and Europe. So what is happening? America wants other countries to deal with those continents, to deal with those regions. So as far as the Middle East goes, the United States is telling the Turks, okay, we want you to watch over the Middle East. As far as Europe goes, the United States is telling the Germans, Germany, you're the biggest economy in Europe. We want you to be the main military power of Europe. And so you guys can deal with the Russians. America wants to focus on its biggest economic enemy, which is China. And so you're seeing the United States giving more and more power to Turkey. Either way, things are not looking good for Israel. Turkey is becoming more and more powerful. Turkey is rising up, and America is embracing this. And Turkey has talked numerous times about actually going to war with Israel. Erdogan recently said, "Oh Allah, please destroy Israel." Why? Because he wants to be Allah. Erdogan wants to be Allah. In fact, Erdogan is a Sufi. And in Sufi Islam, there is a belief that one can become Allah. Yeah, they have this belief that you can have that you go through this experience in Sufi Islam called fanat, which means annihilation. So annihilation of the self. The self becomes annihilated, the self dissipates, and you become one with Allah. And so Erdogan wants to be Allah. He wants to destroy Israel. And do I think that Erdogan is actually going to destroy Israel? I don't think so. Erdogan is pretty old. He's losing popularity. And I think eventually he's going to be replaced by somebody more fanatical than him. But what I will say is that Erdogan is priming the way for Turkey to go to war with Israel. The way I see Erdogan is how history sees Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck did say that he wanted to exterminate the Poles. And the aspiration to exterminate the Poles was attempted by Hitler. So Hitler was trying to accomplish what Otto von Bismarck wanted to do. That's how I see Erdogan. Erdogan is like an Otto von Bismarck. He is paving the way for Turkey to go fully on the warpath in the Middle East. This is why Israel is so terrified of Turkey being in Syria, because if Turkey goes to war with Israel, Turkey can then launch attacks on Israel directly from Syria, and Turkey can invade Israel. Israel is terrified of the idea of America abandoning it, because if Israel has to go to war with Turkey or with Iran or both at the same time, Israel cannot win that war alone. Israel needs the United States. So Israel is terrified of losing American support. Now, here's another thing that I will add to all of this. Israel is dependent on the United States for its security. Now, what happens if the United States begins to withdraw itself more and more from Israel? The end result of that will be Fanaticism fully taking over Israel. Because the moderates in Israel say what? They say, well, we need the United States, so let's be moderate, let's be nice to Christians, let's not be lunatics, let's not build a third temple. But if America tells Israel, listen, Israel, you're on your own, the fanatics will then rise up in popularity because more and more people in Israel are going to say, what is the point of being moderate? America is not helping us. The West is not helping us. What is the purpose of following rules? What is the purpose of being moderate? And so the fanatics will take over. And Israel will become a fanatical society, just like it was when it went to war against Rome, and the Romans eventually destroyed the temple, and the Jews ended up killing each other. I'm talking about the Roman-Judean War / Judean Civil War, because it was also a civil war. So if America begins to withdraw itself from the realm of Israel's security, expect the fanatics in Israel to really fully take over. And the fanatics are going to say, what's the point of being moderate? You moderates, we listened to you for all these decades, and look where it got us. We are being abandoned. We're going to take over. And fanaticism will take over. And the fanatics will eventually go to war, not just with the Arabs within Israel, or they will not just aspire to exterminate the Palestinians, but they will also aspire to kill off all of the Jews who disagree with them. And that's exactly what happened before the destruction of the temple. The Judeans were killing each other, and the Jews who were fanatics who wanted to go to war with Rome were killing the Jews who were not fanatics and who did not want to go to war with Rome. It's going to be very, very ugly for Israel. It's not going to be good, but the world is changing. You know, when I was growing up, it was all about being pro-Israel, and now that is declining, and you are seeing this manifesting itself in the political realm. And it's only going to get bigger and bigger, this phenomenon. It's only going to get bigger and bigger. Hell, we have people listening to a rapper saying Heil Hitler. And the richest guy in the world is Elon Musk, and he hates the ADL. He hates the ADL, one of the biggest, if not the biggest Jewish organizations, the biggest Jewish organization in America. He hates the ADL. He says the ADL hates white people, which is what neo-Nazis have been saying for years. And Elon Musk did the Hitler salute, and he's the richest guy in the world. So before, they were talking about, how the Jews control the wealth and how George Soros is funding all of these politicians. Donald Trump is getting funded. He was getting funded by the richest man in the world, and the richest man in the world just so happens to be a guy who does the Hitler salute and who hates the ADL, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Jewish organization in the country. So people say, well, Donald Trump has to listen to the Jews because he's getting money from wealthy Jewish funders. But Donald Trump was getting funded by Elon Musk, so he doesn't need the Jewish funders. So he doesn't have to be really as loyal to American Jewry. Those are my thoughts, at least. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.